We're happy to have with us tonight Jemila Chellappa, who from the University of Idaho. She's a area soil specialist over in the Treasure Valley area.
Thanks, Ron, for the invite, and good evening, everyone. It's really always happy to be amidst master gardeners, like thinking of soil in an urban setting. And I'm really happy that I'm going to present today, like the most favorable part of my career or something like soils. I always get excited to talk about soil. And today I'm not just going to tell soil like as a simple living ecosystem where you hear always like soil is that, soil is this. So something like a little bit of a different perspective to think soil as a nutrient buffet, like for your gardening or plant growth. Today, I'm just going to give some tips for you to understand like soil's role in plant nutrition. And before saying all this, and Ron already said that like I am doing area extension education here for the Treasure Valley, and I've been concentrating on the field crops. And always I hear people say dirt, and I really get hurt. I wanted to start this talk by saying soil is not a dirt. So dirt is something like throwing it in a trash or a bin. This being like something like 50th or 55th talk, whichever presentation I give, I start by telling that soil is not dirt. It's something more than that. To start with, everybody knows this is a house. So how we consider a house for a livelihood is the similar way the plants need soil. So to understand soil fertility, so there are like many technical terms, soil fertility, soil health, and productivity. So to consider soil's fertility or soil's productivity and health, we need to think soil as having different properties in it. And you have heard about soil physical, chemical, and biological properties. So I always consider the soil physical properties or compare that with the house. So as we know, like house gives that protection, the soil structure or the soil aggregates, porosity and compaction, like what we talk about, the main components of soils, thinking of a soil structure or comparing it to a soil house. So poor structure can lead to compaction or poor drainage or reduced root growth. And second, something that like I used to think the soil chemical properties as the utilities. So maybe the nutrient availability or soil pH or fertility level of the soil. This is what we usually measure through maybe soil testing, or some of you may be experienced by seeing the soil or how well the soil moisture holds the water. So, and the important point for gardeners is that every soil is unique. So, soil test helps us understand these soil physical or chemical properties, right? So, soil physical properties defines the house that sustains life, and soil chemical properties I always equate to the utilities of a house. So, soil chemical health, this is often measured by sometimes through labs like with different parameters, technical parameters. You'll be hearing soil pH, soil CEC if you need like more deep dive into the soil. And all the soil chemical properties are defined as the utilities that helps you to grow plants, right? So having these two in mind, having the soil physical and chemical properties, there is one more thing which we always miss to measure or analyze. And nowadays, this being a talk in all the presentations, all the conference, workshops, meeting, consider your biology, consider the soil biology. Yes, only when you have the soil physical and chemical properties very well balanced, your biology could be maintained. And what is this fertility? Is soil biology same as soil fertility? I think we'll get that clarity when we just get to the end of this presentation, right? So all these soil physical, soil biological, chemical properties all together, they can be put together as soil health. So soil health is not a specific one just considering maybe the fertility or the pH or your organic matter or your biology. It is all summed up together. You get your soil health. So I have a question for you. You can just put in chat which you think as a correct sentence. All fertile soils are productive and all productive soils are fertile. So you can just type in the chat, like either you can give an emoji if like orange or green. I just chose a random color. All fertile soils are productive. All productive soils are fertile. Which do you think is correct? Many say all productive soils are fertile, and some also agree with all fertile soils are productive. So let's come to this at the end, and you will even have a different clarification about this. So there are like three terms I mentioned already: soil health, soil fertility, and soil productivity. So soil that performs its function as an ecosystem to help sustain plants, animals, and humans. This is called as soil health. And when it supports the plant growth by providing the right nutrients and the conditions for the plants to thrive, that is the soil fertility, and that supports the growth of the plant or crops under a specific set of management practices. So that is soil productivity. So these three are not the same, but they are interconnected. So soil fertility always it refers to specifically to the soil's ability to provide or supply nutrients to the plants. And the productivity that refers to the soil's ability to produce crops. So that is the difference between fertility and productivity. So fertility is the ability to supply the nutrients, and productivity is the capability or the potential to produce crops under a specific management conditions, right? So soil also function as an ecosystem. It provides the right nutrient and conditions to the plants, and when provided with a set of management practices, it is having the ability to produce crops or plants. So now that I wanted to take this particular time, maybe 30 or 35 minutes, to just concentrate on soil fertility, because always they talk about chemistry and biology, I want to concentrate more on fertility today. Why it is so important? Because it is essential for strong plant growth, and it impacts the crop yield or quality or whatever may be, and it provides a foundation for ecosystem health. And when there is an unhealthy soil, you can see the soil is compacted, it's dry, or it lacks nutrients, and you can very easily compare the productivity above ground by seeing the plants, how dull it looks, and sometimes it might not seem to have a good healthy leaves or the above ground parts, right? And when you have a healthy soil below, when it's not compacted or it has like a good moisture and lots of nutrients, your healthy soil will be revealed in the plant growth on the above ground, right? So more than like knowing what you want to feed the crops, it is always good suggestion to just go in and check whether your soil is having the ability to provide that nutrients to your plants. So healthy soil, they store carbon, they cycle nutrients, and they also support the biodiversity. So this is why gardeners and farmers like both needs to focus on building the soil fertility below rather than just feeding the plants above. So role of soil and plant growth to start with, it like why soil is so important for plant growth. As I said already, to look into the utilities, how well the chemical properties of the soil are balanced, and how well the soil is structured, the soil physical properties, and both together enhance the soil biological properties, right? So soil fertility is one important factor to be considered when you grow crops or grow plants in your garden. The four important things, the very basic, we all know plant needs sunlight, carbon dioxide, oxygen, and carbohydrates and water. And you all know that nutrients are essential for plants, but how is this supplied by soil? Why do we want to consider creating more nutrient supply from the soil to the plant? May there be like hydroponics, you may get some pot mix, or like without soil you have the ability to grow crops now. But will that meet the essential or the necessary nutrients that soil supply itself, instead of like just going in for an indirect supply of nutrients from outside? So we need them to produce food, obviously, and they provide energy and support and also the growth and maintenance of our bodies. So it's like a chain. If you protect your soil, the soil is healthy, you get healthy plant, and that has a continuity to until your environment. So it's a chain, like it has a continuum between soil, plant, animal, human, and then environment, right? So there is a graph always, like I used to like uh, let the students know or the participants know, like there is a difference between total nutrients and the amount of available nutrients. So the total nutrients is something that soil has already, it has a lot of resource in it, but how well that is made available to the plants, how it is available for the plants to take up during its life cycle. So that is the amount of available nutrients made it throughout its life cycle. So there is a graph difference between the range that the nutrient supplies from the soil to the plant. So when the soil supplies an adequate amount of nutrients to the plant, the soil is said to be in its sufficiency range. But when the plant does not get the enough nutrient for it to complete the life cycle, it is said to be in deficient range. And sometimes the soil may have surplus nutrients that plant may not be able to take up during its life cycle. So that is said to be a toxic range. And when you feed babies with the food, they may not know like when to stop, right? So when you give a bowl of food, they just steak, unless and otherwise we stop them. So when you give like more food, sometimes they might be like having a bloating or like not imbalanced ratio of foods. So that is same as the plants too, it leads to its toxic range. So we should be very well aware of the balanced supply of nutrients to the plant from soil. That is where this concept comes in, the nutrient buffet. So something called to replenish soil. So soil has that resources. How well we maintain is how well the utilities or the biology or the physical properties get supplied to the plants. So importance of soil fertility and the nutrient availability for plant health is what determines like how well these all three are interconnected. So plants don't eat food like we do. So instead, they just absorb the nutrients from soil, water through the roots, right? So here is some example of like soils, like the urban gardening system. You can see the year one, it showed some jalapenos or peppers, and year two we go for there is a picture of a cruciferous like broccoli or cabbage or something, lettuce, and year three you go in for carrot. So why do we need to do this kind of rotation? You'll be hearing about this a lot, like going in for crop rotation each year. And then using some compost. You can see some pictures there, like I put some compost. So using some compost. And we always talk about the pH, maintaining the soil pH. So all these we do to just replenish soil so that they are able to take up the total nutrients from the soil and make it available for the plants during its life cycle. So if you go in for a same plant or a same crop throughout continuously, you may not have the ability to replenish the soil. Or if you don't supply it with an extra amendment like organic matter that supplies through compost or different other biologicals, you will not be able to replenish the soil. So to replenish the soil, you have to like balance the management practices. So to always consider that like you have to think all these four principles of soil health, which is put forward by NRCS. There is sometimes four, there is sometimes five, and this is very basic, like to maximize the living roots, to maximize the biodiversity and keep the soil covered and minimize the disturbance. When you have any management practice that helps you keep this principle in line, and this helps you replenish your soil. I'm not going to dive deep into the soil health, but just to give you a heads up that these principles of soil health help you replenish the soil. So nutrients in soil, they're not static. They are constantly changing depending on environmental conditions, and several factors influence nutrient availability, right? Soil moisture, temperature, soil pH, and the microbial availability or the activity. For example, when nitrogen exists in several forms, so have you heard of like nitrates or ammoniacal form of nitrogen? So different plants require nitrogen in different forms. Like some plants, like when you have like more moisture, they require like nitrogen, and some plants require like ammoniacal form of nitrogen for their survival. Similarly, there are like different nutrients, and each plant requires the specific form of available nutrients. So some forms are like immediately available to plants depending upon the potential or the capacity of the soil to provide the nutrients. And so if nutrients are present in the soil, they might not be available to plants all the time. So understanding this will help you manage soils more effectively. So exploring the dynamic availability of all the essential nutrients. So I said nutrients, and now that comes in another term called as essential nutrients. So for completing a life cycle of a plant, something very essential is really needed to complete its life cycle. I say very essential. It's not just nitrogen, what we talk about, and sometimes we say phosphorus, and sometimes we include potassium. And many a times the secondary nutrients and the micronutrients are neglected for the external application when there is like deficiency in certain nutrients. So to give you an overall chart about the essential nutrients of plant growth, there are 17 essential nutrients, and they are categorized as major nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Sometimes the major nutrients also include the carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but we are not considering that since it is always supplied by the nature. Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, like through water, gaseous exchange, and like different other transformations, additions, and deletions happening through the nutrient cycling in the biological or the biogeochemical processes. So we don't consider more CHO. The next category is the primary macronutrients, that is the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, which we always think about. And the third category is the secondary nutrients. So secondary nutrients are calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. And finally, there are a set of micronutrients. So what we call iron, zinc, molybdenum, copper, and boron. So there is something like kind of memory we always study, like when we just wanted to memorize this. I know you don't want to memorize this, but just like if you're very interested, some you can just think like C. Hopkins Cafe is mighty good and clean. Like C. Hopkins Cafe is mighty good and clean. This is how we like memorize it for like writing essays. So the owner is my copper, zinc, molybdenum, boron, the nickel miner. So it's like the owner is my Cossey Mobile, the nickel miner. So we have a story for that, and I don't want you, because this is something like very confusing sometimes. But since that CHO, it's like always given through nature, and you are very familiar with nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, every one of us. Sometimes what we need to consider is these micronutrients. When the deficiency in the plants are not able to be identified, we have to think in another manner. Not only the supply is less for nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium, we are also low or lacking in these micronutrients, and especially sometimes sulfur is very, very overlooked. Nitrogen and sulfur has very similar symptoms of deficiency, right? So, and this CHO is also considered to be the structural nutrients. So, more or less like they are very well abundant when the formation of seed to the first germination phase. And it is like through the natural process, the carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen is supplied to the plant. So, they are very important for creating the structure of the plants, right? Okay. So, to talk about macronutrients, the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and they are also called the primary nutrients. And very interesting fact about nitrogen is something we think nitrogen, it's green. So, when we supply more nitrogen, the plant looks green. That is the very good indication like nitrogen is available in the plant, whatever plant we grow. So the role is like major, like plant metabolism and growth, right? So leaf growth and chlorophyll. So nitrogen is required for the leaf growth, the photosynthesis, the preparation of food, and it is very, very essential component for chlorophyll production. That's why deficiency in nitrogen could cause yellowing. So chlorophyll is something the green pigment of the leaf. So when the nitrogen is deficient, the green pigmentation get lower and your plant turns yellow. And if it is phosphorus, it's very important for root development and the energy transfer. Sometimes this phosphorus is said to be a very, very immobile nutrient. So it moves very slowly into the plant system. That's why we go always for a starter or a basic or a blanket recommendation of application of this phosphorus even before we go in for planting, usually to many other crops like feed or cash crops, because this is very, very less or immobile in soil, so it takes time to move and make it available to the plants. So it's helpful for the root development and also the energy transfer, what we call it as an ATP molecule that is helpful for converting the energy into the plant system. So deficiency of this may cause like slow growth, or sometimes maybe if you see some purple discoloration in your plants, that might be due to the phosphorus deficiency. And then potassium. So potassium is related to the strength and resistance to the stress. So if you have a good potassium content in your plant is said to have a very good quality, and it is also able to withstand stress, deficiency, and all the abiotic and biotic stresses that your plant undergo. That's why we always call this as primary and major nutrients. So when once you have all this figured out, even if you have minimum deficiency of all the other nutrients, it could be balanced. So that is why this is always considered as macronutrients, which is needed in larger amount to the plants. And the other nutrients, depending upon the quantity, it is categorized as secondary and micro. So macronutrients, the secondary nutrients, that is like calcium and magnesium, comes next. So calcium, this is present in soil as mineral particles like calcium carbonate. So simply we call it as a salts or calcium in solution. So Ca I mentioned here is like calcium, and it is always available as an exchangeable ion. Like I was talking to you about the total nutrients and the plant available nutrients. So when you want that total nutrients to be converted into the available form, it is said that it is in its ionic form. So I told about the nitrate or the ammoniacal nitrogen. So they are ionic forms of nitrogen. Similarly, calcium is available as exchangeable calcium, and it carries that positive cations. So this is easy for exchange in the solution or the soil solution. So from the soil to the plant roots, it's easy for exchange. So the exchangeable and soluble forms of calcium are in dynamic or equilibrium with each other. Similarly, magnesium, and these two are very important for cell structure, photosynthesis, and nutrient absorption. So calcium helps in the nutrient absorption. So it acts as a catalyst for different other nutrients and also helps in the enzymatic chain or the catalytic activity in the metabolism of the plants. And this is also helpful sometimes like for disease resistance And what I missed, protein formation. Since it's like very active in the solution, this acts as a catalyst. And then it neutralizes organic acids and absorption of other nutrients like by roots and their translocations within the plant. As I already said, it's available in the soil solution, so it's easy or helping the other nutrients to get exchanged from the soil to the plants. And magnesium, this is also an essential component of chlorophyll. It acts as a P carrier in plants. So when you have a very good balance of magnesium and phosphorus, it helps in cell division and also protein formation. And the next in the line with the macronutrients, and the least important macronutrient we always consider is sulfur, but this is also an essential nutrient. And this is considered to be the protein building block. And if we are aware of the essential amino acids present in the plants, sulfur is the very important component or the nutrient for all the amino acids, especially cysteine and thionine. Like both are like important amino acids, and if I'm pronouncing it wrong, please forgive me. So those two amino acids are very important, and that is sulfur is helpful in the enzymatic function and the amino acid synthesis, and it is also helpful in the chlorophyll production. That is why we always like have the difference between, like, we get confused with the nitrogen and the sulfur deficiency, because both highly deficient nitrogen and sulfur plants shows like chlorophyll, like decoloration of green color, and it shows yellowing symptoms. And this is also having some impact on the soil pH. So the role of sulfur is very important, like considering the synthesis of amino acids and photosynthesis of plant, and it's also involved in the chlorophyll production. And sometimes for different species of crops, like that allium species like garlic, onions, and some members of the cabbage family, the characteristic odor that you get kind of a pungency and the taste of these vegetables are due to the sulfur component. So sulfur is also another important nutrient, and I also wanted to tell you, when adequate supply of sulfur as to the crops, they do not reach the full productive potential. You might be thinking, oh well, we supplied with a good N, P, and K, and we got a good variety of seed. The soil is having a good pH, the weather was good, the climate is good, and everything was good. And why didn't the crop have its good potential? You lack sulfur. And then finally, micronutrients. So, micronutrients, the trace elements. Why we call this as micronutrients is because they are required in very, 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 very minimum amounts. So, if you say like you need like 5 to 10% of NP and K and 1 to 2% calcium, magnesium, sulfur, in some plants, you might not even require 1 to 2%. I'm talking in a very large scale. Micronutrient is like required in like very, very minimum, like 0.01 to like 0.05%. So that is why this is like often considered as the trace elements. And I already told like there are like six iron, zinc, manganese, copper, boron, and molybdenum. And they are very important for enzymatic function or the plant health. And why do we consider these micronutrients to be important? As I said, that essential nutrients. So for a plant to complete its life cycle, they require all these 17. May it be 0.0.0.0.1 or 0.009 units required for the plant, they have to be there present for the plant to complete its life cycle. That is why these are called as essential nutrients. And a very good red alert, they are required to balance your pH of the soil. So pH, you very well know, there are certain things it's very hard for you to change in the soil properties. One that you cannot change is the soil texture, that is the proportion of sand, silt, and clay. Another one, it could be maintained or changed or maybe like taken from one unit to another by application of lime or the calcium sulfate or any other calcium component, that is pH. But still, maintaining the soil pH is very important, and micronutrients help you maintain that soil nutrients. pH, I'm sorry, soil pH. So now that we got a very good scenario of like what nutrients are, why these nutrients are required, and like iron, zinc, and manganese, they also have like very similar deficiency symptoms, which is really hard to identify. So keeping a close eye, a watch on the discoloration of your plants, give you an identification of what nutrient is deficient in plants. If I have time at the end, I will show like which nutrient, which coloration is exactly the match for different nutrients, right? And the next important thing while we consider soil fertility is soil organic matter and nutrient storage. So that is why we always say just go in for compost. Go and add some organic matter to the soil to have its water holding capacity or nutrient holding capacity. So if you consider a soil, the soil particles, as I already said, the composition of soil has 45% of solid matter and 5% of organic matter. And this remaining 50% is either the soil, air, or water. Depending upon the availability of the water, space in the soils, this water and air gets exchanged. And either it might be 25-25 or 20-30 or 10-40 or 40-10. So soil, water, and soil air occupies this space depending upon the space, the porosity, and the ability for the soil to get the water or gas exchanged. And the remaining 50%, 45% is ideally solid matter that is composed of all our mineral components. And the remaining 5% is organic matter. And it is really, really very rare in any type of soil. It's really hard even to reach like 2 to 3% organic matter if it is a very good fertile soil. And that is why we always consider increasing or enhancing the soil organic matter. So you can see here the soil aggregates. So very well aggregated soils allow your nutrients to exchange and gas or water to exchange in a right way. And if your soil is not having good organic matter, it is either compacted due to different other management practices, or it's like very loose, and either your water gets run off if the structure is not proper, or it doesn't infiltrate properly if the soil is very not very permeable for the movement of these water and gaseous exchange. And then you will have sometimes surface runoff or erosion or the topsoil being eroded if this organic matter is not in a proper balanced condition for this specific amount of either 40 or 45 or 35% of soil mineral matter present in that composition of any soil. So this is what I was talking about. So when you have like a surface sealing or compaction on your surface soil layer, if you do not have a very good balanced organic matter, you can see just it keeps runoff. That's why in the soil health principle, we always say keep the soil maximized, like cover or have the living roots in the soil for a good gaseous and water exchange, and also keep go for some cover crops, not to have the soils like left fallow. So this enhances organic matter to the soil, and that it helps in aggregation of the soil to get your soil not very loose but keep intact within the aggregates and help the anchorage, good anchorage of your root to the soil, and reduce this runoff. So this also improves soil structure and aeration in total, right? And it enhances nutrient retention and release. This all depends upon how well your soil is composed of, whether like you have like a more mineral matter, how well your soil water and soil gas has been able to exchange the porosity of your soil. So this all indirectly connects to your soil texture and structure. That is another different class, but it's just for you to know, if you have a good structure and aeration, you may not have an additional organic matter supplied to your soil. But if there is a question that the soil is not aerated well, or it's getting runoff or not having proper infiltration, you can consider supplying different sources of organic matter to the soil. Yes. So without organic matter, the soil is like compacted, hard, and it's poor drainage, and you'll have a limited poor penetration. And with organic matter, the soil looks like really crumbly, something like we call this soil term like crumbles or like granules that has like a good proportion of the sand, silt, and clay. So it seems to be a very well aggregated particles, allowing for good air and water movement, right? And that's why we consider soil organic matter so important, as it helps in the nutrient retention and release. So this is a very important thing for soil fertility. So the next important thing I want to discuss with you all is like cation exchange capacity. So this is not a very big deal. It's just the cation exchange capacity. So the ability of the cations. So the cations means the positively charged ions. So when you have some certain ions, I was mentioning about the calcium having the 2 plus ions, the cations, and magnesium, and certain nutrients have like negative ions, and we call that as anions. So may it be cations or anions, the soil has a surface, and on your surface you have like negatively charged ions, because the soil is a colloidal complex that has clay in it, and the clay is negatively charged. So when you have negative charges on the surface of the soil, when these nutrients are present, this has the capacity to exchange the negative ions with the positive ions in the soil solution, and this get exchanged. So the calcium or the magnesium or ammonium or potassium that carries the positive charges gets exchanged with the negative ions in the surface of the soil. So this process is called the cation exchange capacity. So how well your soil is able to exchange these cations. So how well your clay or the negative ions or the colloidal complex of your soil has the ability to exchange these cations is called the cation exchange capacity. So more than like looking into pH, sometimes it is advisable to look into your cation exchange capacity, so that you can go in and take a further step in your management practices to balance these positive ions in your soil solution. So that's why when you go for pH balance, if you wanted to buffer your soil, like maintain your soil pH, you apply more calcium, because calcium helps you maintain exchange of this ions from the solution to the colloid, and the colloid to the solution. So that's why we sometimes go in for calcium sulfate if you have like very high pH soils, and like if you have like very low pH soil, you go in for lime, like calcium oxide or hydroxide or calcium carbonate. Naturally sometimes might have the capacity to leave the carbonate behind and just release the calcium to get the other nutrients from the colloid. Yeah, so this is the simple representation of what I was talking to you about now. So in the root hairs, you have like all the available nutrients. So how well your soil is capable to exchange these cations into the plant. That is the ability of your soil's cation exchange capacity, or CEC. So this is another representation, like how the cations get um, into the roots and how well it gets attached. So based upon the anatomy of the root and the plant, they just get exchanged. And when the plant is very active, you will be able to just supply these nutrients into the system, right? And the clay or the colloidal complex is negatively charged, and since we water the plants already, like hydrogen and oxygen is supplied through the water, and this also helps you get that colloidal complex intact to help you interchange the nutrients within the solution and the plants, right? So how CEC influences nutrient availability? So more clay, there is like more positions to hold cations. So low clay content, you have few positions to hold these cations. So simply when the CEC is more, when you get an analysis and test it for CEC, if your CEC is high, well enough, you can have the interpretation that your soil can hold more cations or more nutrients. And if the CEC is low, you have the fewer positions to hold your cations, right? Oh, it's not working. Yeah. So it depends upon like when you have very low CEC, that is in your sandy soils, and if you have a very heavy clay soils, your cation exchange capacity is going to be higher. The factors affecting CEC in garden soils, like obviously clay, type of clay, and the soil pH. Because I said like soil pH and the nutrients have its own connection. Like in different pHs of the soil, different nutrients are available and able to be present in the soil solution. Pure sand has very low CEC. It's less than 2 milliequivalent per 100 gram of the soil. And CEC of the sand and silt size fractions, like it's like almost like 2 micrometer and 2 millimeter. And most of the soils, it's negligible. So, like how well the CEC or the cation exchange capacity affects the availability of nutrients in the soils. Now, like when it is higher CEC, or your soil can hold more nutrients. When it's low CEC, your soil is like having capacity to hold lesser nutrients. And the next important one is the pH, right? So this is also affecting your nutrient availability. And you may be hearing this from many other presentations. So soil pH is a measure of acidity or alkalinity of the soil. So that has a scale 0 to 14. So 0 to 7, it's like the acid range, and the 7 to 14, it's the alkaline range. Always we prefer the range for a better growth or better plant, 6.5 to 7.5, but there's no silver bulletin. Like always, you cannot aim that kind of pH in every type of soil. So depending upon the pH, the nutrient availability varies. So you can see here in the orange side of the thing, when it is like strongly acidic, these are the major nutrient deficiency: iron, manganese, boron, copper. These four are really deficient because they get bonded with the major nutrients like phosphorus, and they form complexes. And that is a whole lot of chemistry behind that. And if it is neutral in the optimum pH range, you can see more or less all the nutrients are balanced and it's available, like N, P, K, sulfur, calcium, magnesium, manganese, boron, and zinc. It's just the iron and copper depending upon like what crops you grow. And if it is like too alkaline, if the soil is too alkaline, almost all of your nutrients are like it's deficient, right? And calcium, it's like positively cations or positive charged ions are present more in alkaline soils like calcium, magnesium, and molybdenum. And some trace elements are really deficient like iron, manganese, boron, copper, and zinc, right? So this is a chart that helps you identify. If you want, like you can, I will just share this slide, and there are like many resources that just helps you identify what type of nutrients are present in which type of pH. This is just an consideration that you have to have in mind before you go in for any crops. What specific type of nutrients is required during a different phases like germination or maturity, or during grain filling, or during flowering, or during fruiting. So accordingly, you can supply the nutrients. And one important final thing is the nutrient cycling process. Though we know the soil has such nutrients, and the solution we can make some nutrients available through some management practices, there is something naturally happening, the nutrient cycling processes. So these are the biogeochemical process by which the nutrients are recycled and reused in the ecosystem. So they involve the movement and transformation of elements such as carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus, because these three are the major nutrient cycles that happen throughout. And one such example like carbon cycle is shown here. Like similarly, each and every other nutrient takes its cycle. it transforms, it add to the system, it gets deleted in the system sometimes due to different management practices, or sometimes it is recycled back and emitted as different component into the gas, like as a gas into the atmosphere. So this is a common simple cycle for any nutrient. And why I want to emphasize this here, because we are talking about nutrients. Since nitrogen, it has a very good capacity of leaching very soon. And when the soil has run off along with the water, and if the soil is like very, very, very permeable, highly permeable, like sandy soils, sometimes it goes into the underground, like ground system, and like it connects into the aquifers or waters. And this nitrogen and phosphorus are expected to enrich in the water bodies, and they create a term called as eutrophication, that is like excess amount of nutrients in the water that creates trouble to the water ecosystem. So balancing these nutrient cycles is very crucial for any type of farming, gardening, or any type of cultivation we do. And this is very important thing to consider, because it doesn't go um, as an negative component to another ecosystem. So while we are considering all these application of nutrients or supply of nutrients through fertilizers or composting or external biologicals or doing some other crop management aspects, we should consider that uh, we are not sending it to another ecosystem or another nearby surface water systems, right? And always we know like healthy soil support the cycling of nutrients. That is why soil becomes a major component in the nutrient cycling processes. And that 17 essential nutrients I was talking to you about, each one has its own nutrient cycles. So balancing these nutrient cycles is very, very crucial. And these nutrient cycles, they contribute to the soil fertility. And then talking about the decomposition and mineralization, the breakdown of organic matter. So when we release nutrients, they become the accessible form to plants. So organic component or the organic matter has all the nutrients. The compound in the soil has all the nutrients, like the total nutrients. As I said, when they are released, they are made as available form. Like nitrogen is in the available form as nitrate or ammoniacal form. Phosphorus is made available as phosphate ions, and for potassium as potassium cations, calcium or magnesium as calcium or magnesium cations, and zinc and iron also as zinc and iron cations, and molybdenum as molybdate, it's an anion. So they are present in an accessible form to plants. So mineralization is nothing but releasing or conversion of these nutrients from its organic form to inorganic ion and made available to plants. So that is also like a different process for each and every nutrients. So when the organic matter get decomposed and when the microbes act upon it with the different favorable conditions, temperature, pH, moisture, and maybe different forms of bacteria or any other microorganism that helps you transform from organic into inorganic. So if these are all present in the system, your nutrients could be released and made as accessible form into the plants, right? So I just wanted to show you an example of nitrogen cycle. So when nitrogen is supplied through different forms, right, either to fertilization or lightning, it gets fixed. And like when you have below ground soil, like all the bacteria helps you convert this organic form of nitrogen into different available forms. Like you see, the nitrifying bacteria helps you convert that into nitrates. And then there are some ammoniacal the ammonification process takes place, like when the livestock or animals just like leave manure in the field, they just convert it into ammoniacal form, and again that is getting converted into nitrites and nitrates with the help of bacteria present in the soil. And again, there is another group of organisms called denitrifying bacteria, which again denitrifies the nitrates and then supplies to the cycle. And this goes as a like a biogeochemical process, and the nutrient cycling for nitrogen takes place. And role of soil microorganism, I was just now talking to you about the nutrient cycling. Microorganisms play a very important role. How well the microbes are active, it helps you in the nutrient transformation and the symbiotic relationship with plants. So mycorrhizal fungi, that's one such example. How well it's like having this mutual um, beneficial reaction with the plants and the soil, and it takes up its food from the plants, right? So soil microorganisms play an important role in the nutrient cycling too. So after all these, managing soil nutrients is very important. So we cannot just like assume that soil has such and such nutrients. Soil testing and analysis is very, very important. So it ensures whether you have an optimal nutrient level to maintain your optimal pH balance, identify if soil has different contaminants, and to save money and resources, you have to go test your soil. This is one such important good practice. Not very often, at least yearly once if it permits, or 2 years or 3 years once, you have to do your soil test. Because plant will show symptoms when they are deficient in certain nutrients, as I already said, yellowing, stunted, or poor flowering, that will really root back to your soil fertility. And finally, the 4R nutrient stewardship, which you'll be hearing everywhere: right source, right rate, right time, and right place. Using the right type of fertilizer, using the right amount of fertilizer, and making nutrients available when the crop needs them, and keeping the nutrients where the crop can use them. Because like, since this process is like conversion of this total to making it into the available form, these four things are important to make that process, the transformation, happen in a right way, and the plant gets its nutrients in an accessible form. When it is not available in the accessible form, even if you have abundance of nutrients, they won't take it up. That's why right source, right rate, time, and place is very important. And using nutrients wisely, it protects the environment and improves your plant health. From first, I'm talking about the essential or essentiality of nutrients. A plant cannot complete its life cycle in the absence of the element, right? So, actions of an element, for example, if nitrogen is deficient, you have to supply it with nitrogen. If you go supply it with phosphorus or sulfur, that is not going to do anything for your crop. And the element must be shown directly involved in the nutrition of the plant. So, if you think there is something like for your metabolism or the plant growth, like when you go in for foliar nutrition, so it's always important like you consider these three criteria of essentiality of nutrients before you supply any nutrients to the plant. And soil fertility is both science plus art. And coming to our first question, whether soil fertility and productivity are same, they are not. So soil fertility is something, the ability of the soil to supply the nutrients, and the productivity is the soil's capability to produce crops, right? So there are many factors. Whatever we spoke about um, was only about fertility, but there are like more than that that contribute to the productivity of the soil. And future directions in soil nutrient management, there are like different other modern techniques available, like precision agriculture, biotechnological approaches to enhance nutrient availability. But we as home gardeners or like master gardeners, or like having like a very small container system, or like doing urban settings of agriculture, we should be very mindful of like supplying the right amount of nutrients at right time to the crop, so that we are not like fed up of like growing plants. What's this happening? Soil fertility is very important aspect to be considered, rather than like considering it in a large scale. When it small scale, soil fertility plays an important role. If you have an eye on that, you can minimize your resources or energy and grow crops wisely. To summarize, the nutrient buffets in garden soil, I was talking to you about soil fertility is very, very essential for plant growth, and the plant requires the 17 essential nutrients. Organic matter, they improve the soil nutrient storage. Soil pH and CEC, they influence nutrient availability. And microorganisms drives the nutrient cycling. By managing soil health, you can create like productive and resilient garden, right? So importance of soil fertility, role of macronutrients and micronutrients, and how these factors, organic matter, pH, and CEC, influence nutrient availability. So by understanding all these and managing your garden soil health, you will be setting your plant up for success. So what I call for action, I encourage you to go in for sustainable gardening practices to optimize soil health and nutrient availability. So hearing all these, do you still tell soil as dirt or soil? Please don't mention that as dirt. It's soil. It helps you grow crop and taste yummy food. It's not dirt. It's soil. Did I take more time?
Well, we're just about out. We did have one question in here. Is there anything to worry about in making a home compost so that the compost will add proper nutrients without taking away from the nutrients that will cause unhealthy soil?
Sure. So compost is a very good resource for enhancing your organic matter. But when you do composting, it's very important that you consider the carbon nitrogen ratio. So when you create that compost pit or like the space you create for compost, check that your carbon nitrogen ratio is like very balanced. Some we call that as a 4:1 part of carbon and nitrogen. So when you give the brown matter and the green matter, see that you partition it correctly, and also see that it's mixed in a regular intervals. And if you're aiming for a good nutritious supply of compost to your plants, don't put in stuffs that add or increase the pH of the compost. So maybe you consult with the nearby extension educator, someone like how well the compost can be healthier so that it doesn't invite or invent more unwanted organisms like bacteria, like not beneficial bacteria that creates pneumonia. So first important thing is maintaining a carbon nitrogen ratio and giving it a good air circulation and maintaining the temperature. So different bacteria do not survive in different temperatures. So like thermophilic or mesophilic bacteria, so depending upon the temperature, they are like able to survive in that specific compost pit. So balancing all this will help you eradicate or not allowing those bacteria to multiply in your compost.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Any other questions here? Well, it's 8 o'clock. Any other questions that you wanted for our plant talk section? I know we're not gardening yet, and people are just getting things started. So have fun getting your seeds started, getting ready to go for your next gardening season. Thank you Jemila, very, very educational. Appreciate your time and your expertise. And we will see you all in 2 weeks.